Welcome to the deep dive, where we take your source material and really try to uncover the insights within.
Yeah, it's all about cutting through the noise, finding those clear streams of understanding in complex ideas.
And today, we're diving into some really foundational stuff. It's about how our minds work, based on excerpts you shared from William James's classic, The Principles of Psychology.
Oh, absolutely. A landmark text. It's dense in places, no doubt,
hmm
but just packed with these incredibly sharp observations that honestly still feel relevant today.
Right. So you wanted us to unpack his view on the, let's say, the basic architecture of the mind. Things like consciousness, the
Yeah.
self.
And those fundamental processes, sensation, perception, memory, even, that feeling of trying to do something, the will.
Okay, so our mission here is to navigate these core ideas from the text, try to translate James's insights into something, well, tangible, helping us understand the mind not as just like static parts, but as this dynamic, living thing he describes.
Exactly. Let's see what James can show us about ourselves.
So where does he start? He's quite upfront about how he put the book together, isn't he?
He really is. He calls it part new, part compiled, even admits a lot of his scissors and paste. He wasn't pretending it was some perfectly seamless system built from the ground up.
And he kind of defends that, doesn't he? His less systematic approach. He argues that looking at our entire conscious states as they are concretely given to us
Basically, how we actually experience things, the whole flow of it.
gives a more living understanding of the mind than just breaking it down into tiny abstract elements.
Yeah, he felt that atomizing approach was like a post-mortem study.
Mm.
It missed the life, the dynamism. He sees psychology as a natural science, aiming for a provisional body of propositions, like a working theory about our mental states.
And key to all of this is his basic assumption, his postulate, that mental action depends on neural change.
He connects mind and brain right from the outset, even though he admits the exact insight as to how it is true lags woefully behind. They didn't have fMRIs, obviously, but the principle was crucial for him.
A vital grounding. And he's very clear this is about the human mind, specifically, not animal minds.
Right, he keeps the focus tight on human experience.
Okay, so building this picture, he starts at the very bottom with sensation,
The
the raw inputs.
signals coming in, yeah. From incoming nerve currents hitting our terminal organs, eyes, ears, skin.
It's like the brain's first contact with the world.
Mm. And he brings up this idea of specific energies of nerves. There was this debate, is the quality of a feeling like redness or a bell's sound purely about where in the brain it hits?
Or is it about the kind of signal?
Exactly.
Yeah.
James kind of leans towards the sense organ itself, the end organ, playing a role, maybe being shaped over time by the stimuli it receives.
And sensations, he says, they give us knowledge of acquaintance, that direct feeling.
Like feeling warmth, not thinking about warmth.
Hmm.
It's different from knowledge about, which is conceptual.
Mm.
Sensations are vivid, lively, and present.
You need a certain amount of stimulus, too, right? A threshold.
Yep, a finite amount to even register, which leads straight into Weber's law.
The just noticeable difference. So the key idea is that the difference you can detect isn't fixed, it's proportional.
Exactly. It's proportional to the starting intensity. His examples are great, adding one candle in dim light. Huge difference.
But add that same candle in bright daylight, you probably won't notice.
Or lifting an extra pound when you're already holding a pound versus adding it to 1,000 pounds. The ratio is what matters.
The source mentions some ratios, like 117th for muscle sense, but maybe 13 for pressure or sound. Needs a bigger relative jump for those.
Right. And Fichtner took that and ran with it, SEC log R, trying to make psychology this exact science.
But James resists just reducing sensations to numbers or simple blocks. Like, is scarlet just more pink?
No, he says it feels fundamentally different. It's a distinct quality.
Which connects to that law of relativity or contrast. How warm air feels depends on whether you were just out in the cold.
Your current feeling is relative to your prior state. Makes perfect sense when you think about it.
Okay, so sensations are the raw data feed. But we experience definite things, not just raw feels. That's perception.
And James makes a really critical distinction here. When you perceive, say, that red ball, the pure sensation of redness isn't somehow still floating around inside the perception of the ball.
It's not.
No, the perception is a new integrated mental state. It uses the sensations, but it's a different kind of brain activity, a different state of mind altogether.
Okay, so perception is more than just adding up sensations. The mind is actively constructing something. And he notes even faint sensations can trigger a perception if they resemble what a thing usually causes.
Like the mind filling in the gaps, matching patterns. Which is why illusions and hallucinations are so interesting to him. He argues the process is identically the same as normal perception.
Really, the same process.
That's his point. Some input comes from the senses, sure, but a lot comes from the mind's own contribution, and you can't tell which is which just by introspecting.
Like the stationary objects seeming to move from a train. Or his example of hearing a sound, thinking it's a ghost, then realizing it's a dog breathing, and then you literally can't hear it the old way anymore.
Or that tragic knitting needle hallucination. It powerfully shows how much the mind builds our perceived reality.
And this leads to apperception. What's that exactly?
Basically, it's how incoming sensations or ideas get understood or apperceived by the ideas already active in your mind. It's recognition, classifying, naming, fitting the new thing into your existing mental framework.
So the mind is actively reaching out and grabbing the new input, interpreting it.
Right, and he grounds it physiologically. The incoming impression activates a whole system of paths in the brain related to your existing knowledge.
He also touches on perceiving space. He thinks even basic sensations have some extensity, a kind of spread outness.
But building up our 3D world involves movement, eyes scanning, hands reaching, head turning relating objects and their sizes.
And most sensations become like signs for others with a more real space value. Like seeing something and knowing how it would look straight on, not just from your current weird angle.
Yeah, and depth cues are part of that convergence, accommodation, the disparity between what each eye sees. It's all part of the brain's construction of space.
Okay, so we've got sensation, perception, but how does the mind manage all this incoming information? Attention seems key. He sees it as selection, right?
Fundamentally, yes. Just like our eyes only see certain light waves, attention selects from all the potential things bombarding our senses or floating in our thoughts. It picks the particular ones which shall be held to.
And he distinguishes between passive attention, something grabbing you, and voluntary attention, where you deliberately focus.
And there's a physical feeling to it, he says, an adaptation of the sense organ, even for mental attention, like you're physically adjusting something in your head when you try hard to recall something vividly.
That's interesting, like bracing yourself mentally. He uses Helmholtz's work on retinal rivalry, too.
Oh yeah, that's a fantastic example. When you have competing images shown to each eye, you don't see a mix. You see one or the other. And which one pops out depends on where you fix the attention.
You have to form as clear a notion as possible of what we expect to see.
Then it will actually appear. It's amazing. Your expectation actively shapes what you perceive at that basic level.
Which leads to that really striking line. The only things which we commonly see are those which we pre-perceive. We see what we're already looking for, what we're prepared to see.
And we're prepared for things that have been labeled for us, concepts stamped into our minds. Without those labels, those mental categories, we'd be intellectually lost. Attention follows our existing maps.
Okay, from attention to perception, then we get to conception. Thinking about things using categories. James says this involves picking out one attribute,
Which he calls mutilating the fullness of S's reality, because any real thing has infinite aspects.
When you think dog, you focus on four-legged mammal or pet, ignoring its specific breed, age, mood right now.
You select. And abstraction is how we isolate those qualities. He talks about the law of dissociation by varying concomitants. That's a mouthful.
What does it mean simply?
It just means if you see the same quality, like red, pop up with lots of different things, a red ball, a red car, a red shirt, that redness starts to feel separate in your mind. It gets dissociated from any one object and becomes an abstract idea.
The red ivory ball example. See a red ivory ball, then a white ivory ball. Okay, ballness is separate from redness. Then see a red book. Now, redness is separate from ballness. The quality floats free because its companions keep changing.
Precisely. And he connects this to association by similarity. But he's really insistent. Similarity doesn't cause the association.
It's the result.
It's the result of underlying brain processes being similar. The real action, for James, is physiological.
Okay, let's dig into association itself. He says it's fundamentally between brain processes, not ideas.
Yes, between processes in the brain. Ideas or objects only suggest each other because the brain activity for one makes the activity for the other more likely to happen.
And the mechanism is neural habit.
Neural habit. Simple but powerful. Currents flow, leave traces, make the paths deeper, like water carving a channel. The more two things are activated together, the stronger the link. It's the physical basis for learning.
He contrasts that sort of total recall, impartial read integration.
where one cue brings back the whole scene, like a rambling story.
Like Juliet's nurse or Miss Bates, he says.
Right, very rare. Mostly we have ordinary or mixed association, which is partial recall. Only some bits come back.
And what decides which bits? Which associates are prepotent?
Ah, those which appeal most to our interest.
Interest. So it's not just random connections firing.
Not at all. Physiologically, he frames it as some one brain process is always prepotent. Some neural pathways more active, more energized, because it connects to something we care about right now.
And the specific factors influencing recall are habit, recency, vividness, and emotional congruity.
Makes sense. Things you think about often, just saw, that were really striking, or that match your current mood, those pathways get priority.
Okay, this flows naturally into memory then, defined simply as retention plus recall.
And both, he argues, boil down to those paths formed by habit in the brain.
So a good memory depends on those paths being persistent, sticking around, and also being numerous, lots of connections, the two conditions of a good memory.
Now here's a challenging bit. He suggests one's native retentiveness is unchangeable. Like your brain's basic ability to form traces is fixed from birth.
Wait, really? But then he says improvement of the memory is possible through practice. How does that square?
It seems contradictory, but I think he means you might not be able to change your brain's fundamental stickiness, but you can get much, much better at using the memory you have. By practicing focused attention, deliberate recall, you strengthen the pathways that do form.
Ah, okay. So you're improving the system of retrieval and connection, even if the raw storage potential is fixed. Like organizing your files better makes them easier to find.
Exactly. He mentions a patient who practiced intensely, giving closest attention, recalling facts daily, and did improve. It's about training the skill.
And recognition that I know this face but not the name feeling. He calls it a tingling trembling of unrecovered associates, a penumbra.
The related pathways are buzzing, but not quite firing fully.
And déjà vu or double consciousness.
He sees it as some elements from a past situation recurring, but not enough to pinpoint the when or where. So you get this vague, general suggestion of pastness without context, weird feeling.
Importantly, he stresses that forgetting is vital. Total recall would be chaos.
Utterly overwhelming. Memory has to foreshorten the past by omitting an enormous number of the facts. It's filtering, simplifying, essential.
And briefly, imagination. He notes it varies a lot. Visual types, visuals, auditory, glottals, movement-based, motiles.
And he cites lock. You can imagine a totally new, simple sensation, like a color you've never seen. Plus, aphasia studies show how brain damage affects different imagery types, hinting at their distinct neural bases.
All right, we've got the building blocks. Sensation, perception, attention, guiding association, and memory, imagination. How does James weave these into that continuous inner experience, the famous stream of consciousness?
Yes. Yeah. He describes it as constantly flowing, but with a different pace. Like a bird's life, alternation of flights and perchings.
The perchings are the moments your thought settles on something definite, an object, a concept. Those are the substantive states.
And the flights are the transitive states, the feelings between the perchings, the sense of connection, relation, direction, and but. Harder to grasp introspectively.
And this is where the fringe comes in, right? This halo around thoughts.
Exactly. Ideas don't just sit there blankly. They have this halo or a psychic overtone, the feeling of tendency. It's what gives you the sense of where your thought is going, what it relates to, its meaning, even if the core image is fuzzy.
So the fringe carries the relational meaning, the connections, the context. He says thinking can happen in any kind of mind stuff, but those fringe feelings are crucial for navigating the stream.
Okay, from the stream itself to the sense of the owner of the stream, the consciousness of self. James hammers this home. Every state of mind forms part of a personal consciousness.
And not just thoughts exist, but I think, I feel. Every thought feels like it belongs to someone. It's owned.
So fundamental. And he splits this self into the me, the self as known, the empirical self in the I, the self as knower, the current thinker.
Let's break down the me. He says it's the sum total of all that he can call his. What does that include?
3 parts, basically. The material me, your body, clothes, house, family, possessions. The social me, your reputation, how you're seen by different groups of people, you might have several social selves, and the spiritual me, your inner being, thoughts, abilities, consciousness itself, your sense of identity.
And we have this instinctive impulse to care for all these needs, protect our body, gather stuff, cherish friends and family.
And there's a hierarchy of selves. Material is lowest, then social, then spiritual is highest. Prioritizing your inner character, your spiritual me, is seen as the highest form of self-care, sometimes even over preserving social standing or material wealth.
He suggests this hierarchy is learned partly through moral education, aiming for the selves we can keep. Spiritual integrity feels more lasting.
And striving for that spiritual me might involve seeking approving recognition by the highest possible judging companion, maybe an internal ideal, or God, the great companion.
So that's the me, the stuff we identify with. What about the I, the self as knower?
That's trickier. It's essentially the passing thought itself, the current moment of consciousness that feels like it inherits or adopts the thoughts that just came before it. That's what creates the feeling of continuity, the warmth, intimacy, and immediacy of being you right now.
He also discusses when the sense of self gets fractured, mutations and multiplications of the self, memory gaps, false memories.
And especially alternating personality. He uses the case of Felida X, who had these distinct states with separate memories and characters. Her second state remembered the first, but the first didn't know the second. He even points to mediums as maybe spontaneous examples.
Then physiologically.
He connects it to which system of brain activity is currently reigning. Whatever neural system is dominant is what captures our interest and forms the basis of the self we experience at that moment.
Okay, let's shift to emotion. This is where he introduces that really counterintuitive idea, the James Lange theory.
It is counterintuitive. He argues that the subjective feeling of an emotion results from the bodily expression. We don't feel sad and then cry. We feel the bodily changes of crying, slumping, etc. And that feeling, I, is the sadness.
So it flips the usual sequence, see bear, feel fear, run.
Right. James and Lange independently propose. See bear may, body reacts, heart pounds, muscles tense, maybe you start running. You perceive those bodily changes. That perception is the feeling of fear.
We feel sorry because we cry, angry because we strike, afraid because we tremble.
Exactly. The feeling is the consciousness of the bodily changes as they occur. He uses fear as a prime example, listing all the physical symptoms, the racing heart, the trembling, the shallow breath, and says the awareness of all that happening is the emotion of fear.
He even connects desires, like the urge to hunt, to nascent excitations, the faint beginnings of the feelings you'd get if you actually performed the act.
The desire is like a low-level activation of the whole action-feeling complex.
What about instinct? How does he view that in humans?
He thinks humans have all the animal impulses, plus more complex ones. And crucially, he doesn't see instinct and reason as opposites, as antagonistic.
Oh, reason can work with instinct.
Yes, reason can trigger imagination, which can then let loose instinctive impulses. And habit plays a role, too, narrowing the range of stimuli that trigger an instinct, like chicks following anything at first, but then habituating to the hen.
Okay, last big area, the will. Making choices, exerting effort. He says voluntary action starts with having the idea of the result or the idea of the movement.
You need a mental target, basically. You have to think about what you want to do or achieve.
And the feeling of struggle, the effort of will.
That happens when an ideal motive, something rational or moral, maybe clashes with a more immediate sensual resistance, like wanting to stay in bed instead of getting up. The effort is needed to reinforce the ideal motive so it wins. The effort feels great by the presence of a great antagonist.
That defines ideal or moral action. For him, the action that requires overcoming resistance through effortful attention to an idea.
The cold morning example is perfect. Sometimes you just get up a fortunate lapse of consciousness, no struggle. Other times, it's a real battle between the idea get up and the feeling stay warm.
And physiologically, does he see willpower as some extra force?
Not really. He suggests every pulse of feeling is the correlate of some neural activity that is already on its way to instigate a movement. Thoughts and feelings are already initiating action tendencies. The idea of adding a separate will force later might just be how we interpret the act of inhibiting an impulse.
So psychologically, volition is mostly about which idea becomes dominant in consciousness, the prevalence of the idea.
Pretty much. Getting the right idea to hold sway is the core psychological act of willing. Whether the muscles then obey is, for him, more of a physiological question.
He sees a similarity between willing and reasoning here, doesn't he?
Yeah, in both, the goal is finding the right conception, or name which suits the needs of the particular occasion best. focusing on the right aspect of the situation.
He even mentions making arbitrary choices just to end the hesitation. That feels very human.
Totally. And that feeling of effort, it comes into play when the ideal motives, the non-instinctive ones, need that extra mental boost to overcome the easier, more automatic path.
He also touches on the explosive will, poor impulse control, defective inhibition, where ideas discharge into action too quickly.
Seen in certain temperaments, or maybe due to habits like drinking, he suggests. But again, his psychological account stops when the idea wins. The execution is physiology.
Wow. Okay, that was quite a journey through James's architecture of the mind. From the absolute basics of sensation,
Through the active construction and perception, the filtering by attention and interest,
the pathways of association and memory, that flowing stream of consciousness.
the layered self, the surprising take on emotion as bodily feedback, instinct, and finally the complexities of the will.
It's really remarkable how he tried to knit together the subjective feeling of it all with the presumed brain processes underneath, even back then.
Absolutely. And even though it's over a century old, it gives you this incredibly rich way to think about your own inner life, doesn't it? How the brain shapes experience, how habits literally carve pathways, how that sense of me emerges from the flow.
It really emphasizes the mind as something active, constantly selecting, connecting, choosing, not just a passive receiver.
Definitely not passive.
So here's a final thought to leave you with, building on James. If the feeling of an emotion really is just perceiving your body's response, and if your sense of a continuous self is primarily that feeling of the present thought owning the last one, how much of what feels like your solid, unchanging personality or your deepest feelings is actually the dynamic, moment-by-moment performance of your brain and body reacting to the world?
That is definitely something to mull over.
Indeed it is. Until our next deep dive,